All right, we're live.
All right. Okay, so this is part 2 of God names in the Gnostic Mass. So this image is a Gnostic talisman, and it is a depiction of Iao Sabaoth. And we'll talk more about if we get to Iao Sabaoth today. There's so much stuff to talk about for the other God names. So yeah, you can go back to that list. Actually, go.
Okay.
That first list. So the last class we talked about Iao, we talked about chaos, we talked about Babylon, and we didn't really get to talk about much else. We talked a little bit about Fale insofar as it relates to chaos, but let me start off by talking a little bit more about Iao, and then we'll get into some other stuff. So at the end of the last class, I can't remember who it was. I was talking about how Iao shows up in the text of the Gnostic Mass 6 times, 6 obviously being the number of the sun, a solar number. And somebody else pointed out that Om is repeated even more times, and I did a quick count, and it turns out Om is 9 times in the Mass, right? So if you have Iao shows up 6 times, Om is intoned 9 times. That's the sun and the moon, and you add them together and you get 15, Liber 15, which I thought was pretty cool. I had never discovered that before. But let's let me jump into some Iao stuff. If I can find, I have so many books out, and I was supposed to bookmark them all, but I must have forgotten to bookmark this section here. So give me 1 second, and I will find the part I'm looking for. Let's see. Okay, there it is. Page 100. That's where I want to go. Okay, so Iao. So here in Mystery of Mystery, in the chapter 8 here, this is on the Greek words and phrases in the Gnostic Mass. I'm going to be referencing this quite a bit here. So starting out with Iao, it says here, they write, Iao is the Hellenized version of the Hebrew Tetragrammaton Yod-He Vav-He. All right, we mentioned that last time. However, it has an independent linguistic association with Deus, that's spelled D-Y-A-U-S, the name of the ancient Indo-European sky god, with the Greek divine names Zeus and Chaos, and with the Latin Deus, right? So all those names are etymologically related. Dios, Zeus, Chaos, and the Latin Deus. The Latin Deus just means God. And the ancient Indo-European sky god, his full name was actually Deus Pater. So the Deus in the what they call Proto-Indo-European language, the Dios means sky, and Pater obviously means father. The Latin word Pater comes directly from the Proto-Indo-European, so it means sky father or father sky. The Proto-Indo-Europeans, I've been researching this stuff a bunch, because when you get into any sort of European mythology, a lot of it traces back to the Proto-Indo-Europeans. So the Proto-Indo-Europeans, they came out of the steppes of Central Asia. And during the Bronze Age, they migrated / invaded a whole bunch of different parts of Europe, as well as Persia, and then they went down into India. So everything from ancient Roman religion, ancient Norse and Germanic stuff, Greek religion, the ancient Persian, like Zoroastrian stuff, and Hinduism, all of that has common elements that trace, common like religious and mythological and linguistic elements that trace all the way back to Central Asia, to the Proto-Indo-European peoples. Anyway, so Iao has this etymological link going all the way back to this Proto-Indo-European stuff. So going on here in their description, it says Kabbalistically it pertains to Tifereth, the divine name of Tifereth in Atzilut. The note to carry on, and so I'm not going to read the full Hebrew of the divine name of Tifereth in Atzilut, but the note to carry on of it just abbreviates to Yod Aleph Vav, IAV. And we'll return to that when we get into the Liber Samic stuff in just a minute. But it can be pronounced, or it often was pronounced I-A-O, or it would be like I-A-U, because that Vav, that V is kind of like an U sound. Ancient sources disagree on the accents to be used for divine names such as Iao, Abrasax, and Mithras. Often the accents for such divine names and barbarous words of evocation were simply omitted, and these names may be pronounced without accentuation. The accents given herein are based on the most frequent ancient usages, right? So in other words, we don't know entirely how all these things were pronounced. So now I'm going to jump over to that book I was just showing you guys, the Mysti book, Dancing Out the Mysteries of Dionysus, because there's a really cool little section in there about Iao. So in the first part of the book, it's discussing the origins, the mythological origins of Dionysus. And it goes into detail about the relationship between Zeus and Dionysus. So Zeus, who we just talked about, is the father of Dionysus. And it even goes through in this book, it goes through the Proto-Indo-European etymology too, of Deus, Zeus. So this little section, it's interesting to think about not only the formula of Iao, but also because Iao has this connection with the Yod-He-Vav-He formula. Think about what I'm about to read. Think about it in terms of the Yod-He-Vav-He formula and the tarot. It's pretty interesting. So it's talking about the relationship between the father Zeus and the son Dionysus. That's where it begins. It says this confluence of father and son serves to highlight their shifting identities, their stories exhibiting only slight and inconsequential alterations. The same is true for his mother/daughter, meaning Dionysus's mother /daughter, or Zeus's daughter. So it says the same is true for his mother/daughter, whether it be Semele or Persephone, described as horned and as mistress of the underworld. She is impregnated by the Drakon Zeus, Drakon meaning dragon, Zeus has like a dragon form, whose brother Hades, who is also Dionysus, is her consort, right? Persephone's consort. The cycle of these ceaseless draconian couplings provides a metaphor for the eternal play of the creative process. Cornelius Labeo, in his On the Oracle of Apollo at Claros, averred that when the oracle was asked to clarify the issue, it stated, Iao is the supreme god. In winter, he is Hades. At the beginning of spring, Zeus. In summer, he is Helios, whilst in autumn, graceful Dionysus. So I thought that was a pretty interesting way to understand the Iao formula and how it would have played out in the ancient Greek mysteries. So for them, all these various gods are all, in a certain sense, like one god. They're all unified as Iao, who they call the supreme god, right? So Hades, Zeus, Helios, and Dionysus are really all one god. They're just in each god represents the sun in a different season of the year. So that's a pretty cool way to think about it. And it makes a lot of sense too when you look at a lot of the Thelemic stuff, because obviously the solar cycle in the Gnostic Mass is pretty evident there. That's a pretty a big part of the mystery. Both the diurnal cycle of the sun and the seasonal cycle throughout the whole year. So let me grab my notebook here. Moving on from the EIO stuff, we can now kind of jump into a partial discussion of Baphomet, although really Baphomet is going to deserve its own presentation because there's so much going on there. But I wanted to kind of give us a little bit of context. Last time we talked a lot about chaos in Babylon. So I wanted to read from T. Polyphilus, aka Dionysius Rogers. He wrote this book called A Bishop's Advice. I think it came out last year. It's very good. I highly recommend it to members of EGC. But he talks in here about the formula of the Gnostic Mass. And he says that besides the text of the Mass itself, the clearest published indication from Crowley regarding these roles, meaning he's talking about the roles of the priest and priestess, is given in the sole reference to the Gnostic Mass in the Book of Thoth. Although the rich symbolism of the Mass might be illustrated with many different tarot trumps, there is only one card where Crowley explicitly observes that it is best fathomed by close examination of Liber XV. That's a quote there, the close examination of Liber XV. A quote from the Book of Thoth. The trump in question is Atu 9, the former Strength, retitled Lust by Crowley. This card represents the act of the original marriage as it occurs in nature, and the figures that it depicts are the Scarlet Woman and the great beasts. Crowley reviews these noumena with reference to pagan mythology, the Christian apocalypse, and the Book of the Law. He concludes, this sacrament is the physical, magical formula for attaining initiation, for the accomplishment of the great work. In alchemy, the process of the distillation operated by internal ferment and the influence of the sun and moon. The beast and his bride, in this mythic sense, are the roles assigned to the presiding clergy of our rite. The beast conjoined with the woman is specified in point 9 of 1 star in sight as the means of establishing an ideal for the orders, which the Adeptus Major rules. So 1 star in sight is an AA essay, but Dionysius is here trying to elaborate on it. So if we keep following the train of thought, it'll make more sense. So that they may possess a not too abstract rallying point suited to their undeveloped states. When considering the putative undeveloped state of the Gnostic Mass congregation, we should keep in mind that the Gnostic Mass was intended by its author to be the order's broad base of public association, as it has indeed become. The central secret of OTO reposes in the sovereign sanctuary of the 9th degree, the full achievement of which the Master Therion described as comparable to a very fine and balanced 6=5, which is the Adeptus Major grade of AA that he just referenced. This functional correlation of major adeptship with the sanctuary of the Gnosis also points to the mechanism by which, through Gnostic extension rather than apostolic succession, our low initiates and sacerdotal clergy properly identify with Babylon and the beasts. So in other words, what he's saying is that like the formula of Babylon and the beast is central to the Mass. And one of the things that the Mass does is it sort of initiates people into the formula, even if you're just in the congregation. So he goes on to write, as in the lust trump, the Gnostic Mass places the female uppermost during the act of oblation. Babylon rides upon the beasts. Another instance of this arrangement can be found in the Vision of the Voice, framed as the common Tibetan symbol. So I referenced this in the last class from the 4th Aether. I'm not going to read the whole section for the 4th Aether because I think I read the section last time. But it's essentially it's an image of Babylon and the beast conjoined. I'll read the last little paragraph here because it's kind of a long thing, but I'll read the last little paragraph. It says, they are clasped in a furious embrace, so that she is torn asunder by the terror of the god, yet so tightly clingeth she about him that he is strangled. She hath forced back his head, and his throat is livid with the pressure of her fingers. So I would suggest reading the whole fourth Aether to get more context. It's kind of a lot of detail to go into now. But there's this sex magical image which Crowley identifies with the Tibetan images of the like female and male Buddha in union. He's saying this is a very similar image that he received in the fourth Aether, the image of Babylon and the beast conjoined. So then coming back here to Dionysius and what he writes about it. So he goes on to say that the mystery of the Eucharist and the Mass might also be pertinent here. It says, while the seer, meaning the seer in the vision of the voice, does not mention having consumed a Eucharist in this passage, there is a suggested interior voice which saith to the seer that he hath trained his eyes well and can see much, and he hath trained his ears a little and can hear a little, but his other senses hath he trained scarcely at all, and therefore the aethers are almost silent to him on those planes, so that the touch, smell, and taste of the elements might not be described. Understood according to Crowley's glosses, the marriage of Yod and He, meaning the Yod and He of the tetragrammatic formula, this vision is consonant with the analysis of the Gnostic Mass afforded by Sabazius in his essay on the formula of the Tetragrammaton. The male figure in the fourth Aether has a rosy force, while the female has a purity of blue. Right, so you think about the colors that the priest and priestess wear, right? The priest wears the red outer robe, and he has the red underneath his crown, and then the priestess has the blue outer robe. These are the distinguishing colors of each. You see regalia for the priest and priestess. In contrast to typical Tibetan images where the goddess's head is thrown back, the celestial lady in this vision has forced back the god's head, so that while she about him clingeth, she is not only seated upon him in sexual congress, but her erect head is above his backbone one. Thus, again, as in the case of the operation in energized enthusiasm, the female officer is coupled distinctly atop the male. So energized enthusiasm, for those of you who don't know, is an essay that Crowley wrote in the Equinox Volume 1. I don't remember which number it's in, but you can also just Google energized enthusiasm and you can find it if you don't have a copy of Volume 1 of the Equinox. But energized enthusiasm is really good. And there's like a little kind of story in it where he goes and attends this secret Rosicrucian ritual it's very similar to the Gnostic Mass in a lot of ways, but it's a good one to read. So back to Dionysius here, he goes on and says, this transcendent and perpetual marriage, which is also denoted in the fourth Aether as the war of the rose and the cross, is the divine reality which the priestess and priest hieratically manifest to the congregation, and which supplies the transformative blessing by which the consecration of the elements take place. Love is the law, love under will. And then I'm going to skip down to his last little comment here. He says, I understand that some readers will be tempted to theologize on the basis of the preceding references to the visionary materials of the apocalypse and our prophet's vision of the fourth Aether. Nevertheless, I caution against it. The aims of our Mass are not metaphysical, and neither the Scarlet Woman nor the great beast is a god. There is no god but man. So I think that's worth keeping in mind as we go through a lot of this material. I am going to be talking about some of these stuff in Liber XV. And once again, I think it would be tempting to theologize, as Dionysius is saying, but I think we should be careful not to jump to conclusions. And it'll make more sense in a minute once I get into some of the stuff in Samek. If you're familiar with Samek, you might already know that, it's got some, I guess, with some people, controversial because you're explicitly invoking Satan in it. But I think that Dionysius' little note here about not theologizing is useful in this context, because when you come across a lot of this stuff like he particularly brought up with the Apocalypse of St. John, otherwise known as the Book of Revelation. If you were to try and interpret all of these thelemic symbols in the Gnostic Mass and in the Vision and the Voice, if you were to try and interpret them along the lines of Christian theology, you'd be jumping to a lot of what I would say would be unfair conclusions, because obviously it just looks like straight up Satanism, but that's not really what's going on. And there's a reason behind that. So let's just kind of move forward a little bit here and talk more about Babylon and the beasts, and the god names and the formula of Baphomet and On, I think, can make a little bit more sense here if we look at Liber Samek. So, but real quick, before, to give a little more context as to why, because you might be wondering, just real quick, can I ask how many of you guys are familiar with Liber Samek? Have you guys read it or done any of the invocations? So I see a couple of hands there. So, okay, cool. So you guys are at least familiar. I'm going to read one more thing from T. Polyphilus, aka Dionysus, about the Gnostic Mass, and this will hopefully give us some context as to why I'm jumping to Liber Samet. So T. Polyphilus writes here, he says, as I have discussed elsewhere, the Gnostic Mass operates on diverse and parallel planes, magical, communal, and doctrinal. Now, as far as the magical plane goes, this is what T. Polyphilus asserts. He says, the magical effect for the individual is the one that Crowley explains in Magic and Theory and Practice. The communicant is gradually made divine, being brought swallow by swallow towards knowledge and conversation of the Holy Guardian Angel and to the ultimate attainment. And this effect is secret in the sense that it is utterly ineffable. So in other words, what he's saying is that on the magical plane, the Gnostic Mass, it aims to bring the communicants closer to knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. And this might be one of the reasons why a lot of the same God names show up in both the Gnostic Mass on this list here that I have, as well as in Liber Samek. So I'm going to pull out Liber Abba and go to Liber Samek now. And I would actually suggest, I apologize, I did not have time to really prepare all the slides like I wanted to. But if you have a web browser available and you want to just jump on and Google Liber Samek, that's Liber spelled L-I-B-E-R, Samek is S-A-M-E-K-H. You can find the full text of the ritual. It might be helpful for you to read along with some of this stuff as I go through it. I'm not going to go through the entire ritual because that would take way too long and it would kind of divert us from our purpose. Because I mean, it's a very different ritual than the Gnostic Mass. However, there are these common God names that pop up, and that's one of the main things I want to talk about. But just real quick, we'll take a look at the front page here of Liber Samek. Do you guys need a minute to pull that up if you want to try to pull it up? Am I moving too fast? Hold on one second. Okay.
I just posted a link in the chat for the Liber Samek if
cool.
You guys want to access it that way.
Cool. Yes, thank you. Perfect.
And let me know if you need me to share the slides again, but I had to click out so I could get to the browser.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I go ahead.
Sacred Text has a really good, quick, easy, available version too.
That's the one that I pulled up earlier with Sacred Text. You can just go back to that list, Vanessa, the list of God names that we were just looking at. You can just pull that one up again. So Liber Samek, this is the number on this Liber is 800 DCCC, which is Roman numeral for 800. And if we pull out Sephiroth and do a quick look at the number 800, I think is very instructive. So, in Sephiroth here for 800, it says a bow, and then it has the symbol for Sagittarius. And then it says the three paths, Kof, Shin, and Tau, leading from Malkuth. Hence, much symbolism of the rainbow of promise. So, this is another thing that's detailed in the Vision of the Voice, this whole thing of the bow and the arrow on the tree of life. So if you take those three paths that add up to 800, Kof, Shin, and Tau, right, at the bottom of the tree of life, coming out of Malkuth, they go up, right? And you have Hod and Netzach that that Kof and Shin connect to, and then you have the path of Pe, the tower, that then runs across from. I really should have pulled up an image of this, but you guys are. I think you guys are all familiar with the Tree of Life. We don't. You guys can probably picture this in your heads, right? So you have Hod and Netzach with the path of Pe, the tower connecting them. So the three lower paths coming out of Malkuth, and then the path of Pe right there, that forms like the bow. If you can picture like a bow and arrow being pulled back. Those three paths, the Mount Malkuth would basically be like the hand, right? Where the hand pulling back the arrow on the bow and arrow would be. That would be like roughly where Malkuth is placed. So you have those three lines connecting, the two lines from the string of the bow, and then the bottom part of the shaft of the arrow, right? And then the path of Pe would be the actual bow itself. And then the part of the arrow that extends up past the bow is the path of Samek, right? Which goes straight up to Tifereth, the sun. So this is, in the Vision of the Voice, it goes into all this stuff. Super significant Kabbalistic symbolism for attaining knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, which obviously is what Liber Samek is about. And of course, Samek is that middle path running between Yesod and Tifereth. And the subtitle here of the ritual of Liber Samek, it says, being the ritual employed by the Beast 666 for the attainment of the knowledge and conversation of his holy guardian angel during the semester of his performance of the operation of the sacred magic of the Brahma or the Mage. So to jump into a little more Kabbalistic detail before we move into the God names here in Samek. Samek, Samek spelled in full is 120. And of course, On, the God name On, that's on our list there, is the letters O and N correlate to Ayin and Nun, and that also adds to 120. And of course, if we go back and picture the Tree of Life again, where we have our little bow, if you coming out of Hod, connecting with Tifereth, is the path of Ayin, the devil. Coming out of Netzach, connecting with Tifereth, is the path of Nun, death. So it's like all these, the symbolism and the gematria of all these paths from Tifereth all the way down to Malkuth, it's like they all like reinforce the same idea. They're all like reconnect this idea of reaching Tifereth. And there's just all this symbolism here in regards to knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. So let me double check my notes here. And Samek, just before I jump into this, just a personal note on Samek. I really like Liber Samek. I have utilized these invocations over the years, and I've found them to be very beneficial. I feel like it's gotten me, at the very least, closer to the Holy Guardian Angel. I don't claim to have achieved knowledge and conversation, but I think this has definitely been one of those things that has helped. However, you know, when it comes to the Holy Guardian Angel, everybody's path there is different. I know some Thelemites who really just don't care for Liber XV. They've never found much use for it. So, you know, as Mackay says, your mileage may vary. But if you've never experimented with any of the invocations in here, I recommend it. Now, to do the ritual in full, you should read the little notes at the very end of the ritual. Crowley goes into detail about how you do it all. And there's all this like complex stuff you're doing with your body of light. Because when you get to this point in terms of AA, and I'm, you know, just so you guys know, I'm not in AA, but when you get to the point of doing this practice in AA, you're a Dominus Limitus, right? Which is right there on the path of Samek. So you've already mastered the astral plane. You've already been doing all these yogic practices. You have a fair mastery of dharana, right? So you can keep images very well fixed in your mind. And when you do the ritual the way Crowley instructs you at the end, you're utilizing all these techniques. However, just the invocate, if you just read through the invocation themselves and try to do as much of the visualizations as you can, I still think it's super powerful, even if you haven't mastered all the other, you know, yogic stuff and subtle body stuff. But that's just a personal note. Do what thou wilt. So now let's jump in to the God names that are show up in the Mass and in Liber XV. So just real quick here, still on this very first part, he says, point 1, there's some Latin here that means restored text of the gospel. The invocation, magically restored, which is significant to the barbarous names, etymologically or Kabbalistically determined and paraphrased in English. So when you look at, we're not going to talk about anything in section A or AA, go to section B, which is the element of air. So you would be in the east, right? In the quarter of the east when you're doing this part of the invocation, the air section. So what he's saying here is on the left-hand column, you have the barbarous names. On the right-hand column, you have the etymologically or Kabbalistically determined and paraphrased in English, right? The sort of the meaning, Crowley's understanding of the meaning of the barbarous names is in the right-hand column. They're not exactly like direct translations because being barbarous names, we don't actually know for sure. A lot of these, though, just to point out, Liber Samek, I'm sure some of you know this already. Liber Samek is Crowley's sort of embellishment or addition to the preliminary invocation of the Goetia, which does not originally come from the Lesser Key of Solomon. It actually originally comes from the Greek magical papyri, which I want to say is like 2nd or 3rd century CE. So, I mean, it's way back there. We're talking ancient Greco-Egyptian magic. And that's where the preliminary invocation of the Goetia, which is also called the invocation of the Bornless One or the Headless One. Headless One is actually probably a more accurate translation. Crowley, you went throughout this, he uses Bornless One, but Headless One is probably a more accurate translation. So anyway, Crowley, this ritual is built on a much older Greco-Egyptian ritual. And the Greek magical papyri combines stuff from not only Greek and Egyptian religion, but also pulls in Jewish stuff as well. It's a really interesting syncretic book of spells. And you'll see that in these God names. There's obviously there's Greek stuff, but there's also, you know, Jewish stuff. There's, you know, there's lots of different stuff going on. So looking at section B, the air section, let's go through and talk about some of the names that show up. So we have, if you look down here, the very second barbarous name is Thiau, right? The TH should be like a tau, and then the IAF capitalized. So as I mentioned before, the EAO is spelled typically 2 different ways, either with the IAF, the F being evolve, or IAO. So if we look here at Crowley's little like paraphrasing of the meaning on the column right next to it. He says, "O son IAF," right? Iau would be the way you pronounce it. "O son Iau, O lion serpent son, the beast that whirlest forth a thunderbolt, begetter of life." And then again at the very end of section B here, we have the same thing shows up again, the th in front of the Iau. And so we can see here that this, obviously we have the idea of the sun, the lion serpent, right, who is Baphomet, right? In the Creed of the Gnostic Mass, we clearly identify, Baphomet with the lion serpent. And then we also have the beast. So the sun, the lion serpent, and the beast, Crowley is connecting all of these symbols, these ideas, to this formula, this Iau formula. So let's jump real quick here. Actually, let's talk about the different spelling between the IAF versus the IAO spelling, because I think this is really interesting. So if we go to Magic and Theory and Practice, Part 3, Chapter 5. Let's see here. That is page 100. If you have the actual like Liber XV, you can pull this out and look at it. So we'd be going to page 158. This is the chapter on the formula of Iau. So if we look at his, actually page 160 is where he has 160 and 161, he has this little diagram here. These little charts that break down the spelling. And then if you look, it breaks down the spelling of the formula of Iau. And if you look on the next page, it's got it broken down by aeon. This is really cool. I'm not going to read the Aeon of Isis or the Aeon of Osiris, but you'll notice for the Aeon of Osiris, he has it spelled as IAF. So he has also, in other words, what he seems to be saying is that the IAF spelling is the old Aeon version of the formula, which is perhaps interesting. What, in the Gnostic Mass, he uses the IAO formula, not the IAF spelling. But down here, he breaks down by letter what the symbolism in the Aeon of Osiris would have meant. So I'm not going to read the part for I or A, but F, he has Vav, meaning the sun, as in like the sun in the sky, and the sun, S-O-N. But then if we jump over to the Aeon of Horus, he has this different spelling. He has the F, right, the Vav in front of the IAO, and then another F at the end. So I'm not going to read through all of this, but just real quick, I'm going to read some of this so we can make sense of the formula of IAO with the Vav in front at the end and at the end in the Aeon of Horus. So he has F is the manifested star. I is the secret life, light, love, liberty, and silence. And it's also, those correspond to the serpent, the lamp, the wand, the wings, and the cloak of the hermit. And then the A of the formula is the babe who has formulated his father and made fertile his mother, Harpocrates, etc., as before. But he develops into O, the exalted devil. This devil is called Satan or Shaitan and regarded with horror by people who are ignorant of his formula and imagining themselves to be evil, accuse nature herself of their own phantasmal crime. Satan is Saturn, Set, Abrasax, Adad, Adonis, Attis, Adam, Adonai, etc. So I'm not going to read through all of that, but he goes into the symbolism with Capricorn, the sun in the south. And he's basically trying to say, look, this is not evil. In the Aeon of Osiris, they viewed this as evil because they didn't understand. But then he goes on, he says, we have therefore no scruple in restoring the devil worship of such ideas as those which the laws of sound and the phenomena of speech and hearing compel us to connect with the group of gods whose names are based on the SH and T, right? Shin, Teth, or D, vocalized by the free breath of A. for these names imply the qualities of courage, frankness, energy, pride, power, and triumph. They are the words which express the creative and paternal will. So, I mean, for Crowley, that's what the devil, so to speak, represents, are these qualities of courage, frankness, energy, pride, power, and triumph, as well as the creative and paternal will. The devil is Capricornus, the goat who leaps upon the loftiest mountains, the godhead which, if it become manifest in man, makes him Igipan, the all. The sun enters this sign when he turns to renew the year in the north. He is also the vowel O, proper to roar, to boom, and to command, being a forcible breath controlled by the firm circle of the mouth. He is the open eye of the exalted sun, before him all shadows flee away. Also that secret eye, which makes an image of its God, the light, and gives it power to utter oracles, enlightening the mind. Thus he is man-made God, exalted, eager. He has come consciously to his full stature, and so is ready to set out on his journey to redeem the world. But he may not appear in this true form. The vision of Pan would drive men mad with fear. He must conceal himself in his original guise. So this brings us, of course, to all this discussion excuse me, of the O, Ayin, right, which is also, of course, Trump 15, the devil card. But this brings us also to the god name on our list here, Pan, because Crowley very much connects all of these ideas to Pan. Here, I'm not going to read all the rest of the stuff, but I am going to skip down here to where he talks about getting to the formula in its totality. This yod, meaning the I of the IAO formula, this yod in the virgin expands to the babe in the egg, the A, the Aleph, which is of course the fool, by formulating the secret wisdom or truth of Hermes in the silence of the fool. He acquires the I wand, beholding and acting and being adored. So you can think about, the lance and the mask probably corresponds to this I wand. And there's, of course, beholding, acting, and adoring of the lance that all happens in the Gnostic Mass. The inverted pentagram, Baphomet, the hermaphrodite fully grown, begets himself on himself as V again. He means the final V in this new spelling he's come up with, the V-I-A-O-V version of the formula. Note that there are now two sexes in one person throughout. So, of course, now this brings us to this other god name on our list, Baphomet here. There are now two sexes in one person throughout, so that each individual is self-procreative sexually, whereas Isis knew only one sex and Osiris thought the two sexes opposed. Also, the formula is now love in all cases, and the end is the beginning on a higher plane. So that hopefully gives us a little bit of context. I really like to think about the Gnostic Mass, not that there's a right way to think about it. I think there's probably a lot of different planes on which the Mass operates, but I really like to think about the Gnostic Mass as the soul of one human being. All the officers and the congregation represent different elements of this being, right? So the priest and the priestess would be this, well, I just lost my page, but that exactly what I was talking about, the two sexes in one, right? Babylon and the beast conjoined to create Baphomet. And Sabazius and Helena talk about this in Mystery of Mystery, right? They conjoined to create Baphomet, right? The two sexes in one. And they give birth to this magical child. So now let's jump back to Liber XV, and this will give us a little more context. The letter O on the section C for fire. If you go down to where it says just the triple O, he has Satan thou I thou lusts as the explanation for it. So hopefully the use of Satan thou I thou lust makes more sense in context of everything I just read, and how that might apply to the EIO formula as well as to Babylon and the beast conjoined to create Baphomet. But now let's jump. There's more of this the IAF, the IAU shows up again a few times. If we go over to section D, the water, when you're invoking water in the West, we have the first barbarous name here is Ru Abra Iau. And the explanation he has in the other column says, thou the wheel, thou the womb that containeth the father, Iau. And then we skip down to Babylon, Baal bin Abaut. So obviously Babylon on our list of God names here. So in his little explanation in the other column, he has written, Babylon, thou woman of whoredom, thou gates of the great God On, thou lady of the understanding of the ways. So that is, On, of course, was an ancient Egyptian sun god. So we have this formula that I mentioned earlier that leads to Tifereth, to the sun, where you attain knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel. But here, Babylon, obviously she has On in her name. Crowley is calling her, among other things, the gate of the great God On, right? She gives birth to the sun. And of course, the sun then returns to her, right? When the crossing of the abyss, every man and every woman is a star, right? We're all born from Babylon, but when you cross the abyss, you're received back into Babylon. So she is both the creator and the destroyer in that sense. And then On shows up again in the very next barbarous name, Asal On Ai. And the little paraphrasing he has says, hail thou the unstirred, hail sister and bride of On, of the God that is all and is none by the power of 11. And then Iau shows up again in the next, the Afin Iau, which he has written as thou treasure of Iao. And then we have another one of our God names shows up here. If we go down to Abrasax shows up, and the little paraphrasing he has written in the next column, it says, of the Father, the Son of Hadith, of the spell, the Aeon of Horus. We'll talk more about Abrasax if I have time. It's already a little after 5. There's a lot to go into Abrasax. But his little understanding, or his little paraphrasing of what Abrasax means within Liber XV, I think is pretty interesting. But then we have another one that shows up here. Vanessa, will you skip to not the next slide, but the slide that's actually after that? That says the list of funny Greek words in Liber 15 that aren't God names. That was the best title I could come up with for this slide. So we have on here Iskaros. If you go down there, Iskaros, which means mighty one, right? And here in Liber XV, the bottom of section D, Iskure, which is the same. It just has a slightly different ending, but it's the same Greek word. And it means the little thing he has, it says mighty art thou. So interestingly, I mean, this whole section D, we're dealing with the element of water. There's all this stuff about Babylon, but we also have Abrasax. So I'm wondering, who is he saying is mighty art thou? Is he just saying all these deities and forces associated with the element of water are mighty? I don't know. It's interesting. But I'm not going to try to interpret it. I'm going to just let it kind of be a mystery. Maybe the more and more I utilize these invocations, the more and more it'll make sense. So let's jump now to section F, the spirit section. We have, interestingly, you have Om shows up, the boss Om. Om, of course, being not a God name proper, but a magical formula that's also in the Mass we mentioned earlier. And this little paraphrasing, he says, ye their gods going forth uttering Om. And then we have, if you skip down a couple, to the barbarous name Sa-Ba-Ut, which is essentially the same as Sabao. So in the list of God names we had Iao Sabao. Sabaut is basically just a slightly different spelling of Sabao. So Sabaut, he has written out here as Nuit Hadith Rahor Kuit. And then of course he has Iau again, and it says Hail Iao, it says Hail Great Wild Beast, Hail Iao. And Then section G. So just so you know, I think section F is spirit passive. And section G is spirit active. I might have it backwards. One spirit passive, one spirit active. That's why there's two different spirit sections. But if you read his little explanation at the end, he goes through each section. Let me see here. Section G, yes. So section F is active pentagrams, invoke spirit, spirit active. Section F is spirit active. Section G, which we're going to go to now, is spirit passive. And when you do this, apparently you're supposed to do all the appropriate pentagrams too for the quarters. There's a lot going on in this ritual. But let's see, let's find our god names. So Iau with the TH at the end this time shows up again. Sun, lion, serpent, hail, all hail, thou great wild beast, thou Iau. We have Abrasax shows up again. The father, the son of Hadit, of the Speldi, and of Horus. There's more of the letter O, the I, Satan, lust of the goat. We have Adonai, right? So Adonai does not show up in the Gnostic Mass, but obviously on that god name is within Adonai's name, right? And I'm just going to read the little paraphrasing he has here for Adonai. Obviously, Adonai obviously shows up a lot in Liber 65 as a title of the angel. So there's obviously a lot of mysteries there wrapped up in Adonai. So the little paraphrasing he has: my Lord, my secret self beyond self, Hadit, all Father, hail on, thou Son, thou life of man, thou fivefold sword of flame, thou goat exalted upon earth in lust, thou snake extended upon earth in life, spirit most holy, seed most wise, innocent babe, inviolate maid, begetter of being, light of life, love, and liberty, soul of all souls, word of all words, come forth, most hidden light. And then that covers, we have one last thing. If you jump to section J, the very end of the ritual, it's the proclamation of the beast 666. You have Iau Sabau, right, which is just slightly different spelling of what shows up in the Gnostic Mass, where it's Iau Sabao. Interestingly, when the priest pronounces Iau Sabao, it's the first god name right after he's opened the veil. Iau Sabao is the first of those god names that he recites. Whereas here, it's at the very end of the ritual of Liber XV. Okay. So that was kind of a lot to go through. Do you guys have any questions on that? It's 10 after 5. I'll go for about 20 more minutes. I've got more stuff I can talk about. But do you guys have any questions on Liber XV? I'm not going to try to get too into analyzing Liber XV because I don't feel like I have the expertise. But I do feel like, you have the beast being invoked again and again. You have Babylon being invoked in Liber XV. So clearly this formula of Babylon and the beasts that T. Polyphilus says is there in the Mass is also there in Liber XV. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts on that? Here, let me pull up the chat. I can't see it. Okay. All right. So sounds like we're good to go. So I will just keep rolling. Let's take a look at Vanessa. Will you go to the slide that says, the slide right before this says invocation after the parting of the veil? Okay, so this I put down, I just pasted in the actual Greek of what the priest says when he opens, right after he opens the veil, right? So he's opened the veil. There's the priestess on the altar. with the cup and the paten. And this is all the Greek stuff that he intones. So I'm going to go through this. I mean, we've already talked about some of these god names, but we'll kind of go through it and talk about it in the context of the Mass here. So let me grab my books. I've got so many different books here. So let's go back to Mystery of Mystery and talk about the chapter 8, the Greek words and phrases. Talk about the translations here. So starting out with the io sabayo, right? That's the first line there. The first thing the priest says after he opens the veil. So in here, in Mystery of Mystery, Sabbatius and Elena say their translation of this is o ia o sabayo. But then they note in the comments that io is not readily translatable into English. It is an exclamation of either joy or sorrow, and was one of the cries used to invoke Dionysus. Iao Sabayo is a name found on certain Gnostic gems associated with the Abrasax and Mithras cults. It may be a variant of Iao Sabaoth, which is the Hellenized version of Yod-Heh-Vah-He Zabaut, which means the God of armies, or Yahweh. I've seen it as Lord of the hosts of the mighty. And it's like Yahweh of the armies, but it specifically means like Yahweh as the commander of the angelic armies. So it's pretty interesting to think about that. And it says down here though that so the Hellenized version of the God of armies and the divine name of Netzach in Absolute. However, Sabao may also have a linguistic relationship with Sabazios, right? Sabazios is the name of a Phrygian deity identified with Dionysus, who is attributed to Tifereth along with Iao. And then it says, see also the commentary on section J of Liber XV. So actually we are going to jump back to Liber XV because I actually meant to already read that commentary from section J. Because this is actually, I think this is really cool. And it ties back to some of the other ideas we were talking about earlier. So in the little commentary at the end of Liber XV, go to section J, this goes into more detail about the formula of the beasts. And he says, for know this, I'm not going to read all of section J, I'm just skipping around here, but it says, for know this, that the name Iau in its most secret and mighty sense declareth the formula of the magic of the beast, whereby he wrought many wonders. And because he doth will that the whole world shall attain to this art, he now hideth it herein so that the worthy may win to his wisdom. And then he goes on to say, moreover, also is Iau verily 666 by virtue of number, and this is a mystery of mysteries, who knoweth it, he is adept of adepts and mighty among magicians. Now this word Sabau, being by number 70, is a name of Ayin, the eye and the devil, our Lord and the goat of Mendes. He is also the Lord of the Sabbath of the adepts, and is Satan, therefore also the son, whose number of magic is 666, the seal of his servant, the beasts. But SA is 61, right? Ein, Aleph Yod Nun, the outermost veil on the tree of life, the knot of Nuit. BA means go for Hadit, and F is their son, the son, S-U-N, who is Ra for Kuit. So we have Nuit, Hadit, Ra for Kuit there contained within the Sabau formula. So that's definitely worth thinking about in terms of when Iao Sabao is invoked here by the priests. So now let's jump on to Abrasax. So Kyrie Abrasax. So Kyrie just means, it's translated as Lord, right? So the translation is Lord Abrasax. So Abrasax in gematria equals 365. It says here Abrasax is the name given to a composite solar divinity who was depicted in a number of talismans dating from the 1st and 3rd centuries. Abrasax was formerly and erroneously believed to have been the invention of Basilides, but was used by some Gnostics as an alternate name of the demiurge. The number 365 corresponds to the number of days in the solar year and thus contributed to the solar symbolism of the name. Also, Abrasax has 8 letters in the name. Seven letters in the name. I do know how to count, right? Yeah, 7 letters in the name. And this has traditionally been understood to apply to the 7 planets. So Abrasax is this sort of solar demiurge figure that represents the entire solar cycle and all the 7 planets, right? The 7 traditional planets, because we're talking about the ancient Gnostics here. They didn't know about the other planets yet, and they included the sun and the moon as planets. But let me pull up. I think I have a couple other notes on Abrasax. So let me see here. Okay, so I was going to note on Basilides. So Basilides obviously is a Gnostic saint, and he was one of the Gnostics, and he has his own school. So, like with what Sabazius and Elena are pointing out here is that Crowley himself probably at the time we didn't know as much about Gnosticism. The Nag Hammadi library had not been discovered yet, so Crowley probably would have thought that Abrasax was the invention of Basilides, but they're pointing out that there were definitely other Gnostics as well that utilized this name as a name of the demiurge. Demiurge, of course, just being a title for the creator of the material realm, but not the highest god. So in Gnosticism, you have this idea that there's these archons, right? There's these multiple levels of creation. These ideas definitely influenced, Kabbalah. If we look at, the emanation of the tree of life, right? So the demiurge usually is like, in the Kabbalistic tree of life is attributed to the sphere of Hesed, right? Because sky father gods are often attributed to Hesed. So this demiurge figure often in Gnosticism thinks that he is the sole creator of the world and the highest God, when in fact there are other divine powers higher than him. So now let's move on to Kyrie Mithras, which just means Lord Mithra. Mithras, spelt this way as it is here in the Gnostic Mass, adds up to 365 as well. So just like Abrasax, we have 365. It says this is the solar Mithra Perseus of the, I'm not sure how to pronounce this word, Cilician / Roman Mithraic mysteries, not necessarily the ancient Iranian god of the same name. So there's a really sort of complex evolution between the Iranian or the Persian god Mithra and the Mithras of the Roman mystery cult. Also, there is a Mitra in Hinduism that is etymologically linked. This all goes back to the Proto-Indo-European stuff I was talking about earlier. Mitra in Hinduism and Mithra in the Persian system. There's an etymological link there between their two names. But Mithras, once the Roman cult spread, Mithras had kind of taken on a bunch of other symbolism, and it had become very separate from the Persian idea of Mithra. Although I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the Persian Mithra had a bunch of solar symbolism as well. So anyway, going on here, it says that according to one theory, when the calendar was corrected by adding 5 days to the 360-day year, the proponents of the Mithraic mysteries reinforced the solar nature of their deity by changing the spelling of his name from, I don't know exactly, I'm not super well versed in the Greek alphabet, but it's a slightly different spelling of Mithras that equals 360 versus the Mithras here in the Gnostic Mass that equals 365. I think that's a sigma. They added a sigma there, basically the E looking letter between the M and the I looking letters. they added that one letter to get 365. Kind of interesting, right? That the Mithraic mysteries, the in the Roman Empire, that they would have done this sort of numerological gematria thing, kind of similar to how Crowley changed the spelling of Babylon from with a Y to an A, or at least actually in the Vision of the Voice, that was the way it was communicated to. She starts out in the Vision of the Voice in the earlier Aethers, Babylon spelled the way you find it, like in the Bible, Babylon. But then later in the Aethers, as she more and more unveils herself, she's Babalon, which changes the gematria, which obviously adds different significance. So the same sort of thing here might have happened with the Mithraic mysteries. They changed the spelling to change the gematria. It is worth noting there is a lot. I would like to eventually go into a lot more detail on the Mithraic mysteries, because there's a ton of stuff here. But it's worth noting he is not exactly the sun god. He is solar in the sense that he is linked to the solar forces, but he is not himself the sun god. So in part of the problem with the Mithraic mysteries, let me pull up my notes here, make sure I get this all right. So in the Mithraic mysteries, his cult became very popular in ancient Rome when the Roman Empire kind of spread all throughout the Mediterranean. And there were a lot of sailors and soldiers that were initiated into the Mithraic mysteries. And they were all over the Mediterranean. They had these, what they called Mithraians, which are usually these little underground chambers, like little caves, where they would perform the initiations into the rites of Mithras. And it was very male dominated. In fact, in a lot of these places, we believe that it was exclusive to males, although there's some evidence that there in some places they allowed females to join. But nevertheless, it was definitely like a male dominated mystery cult. Lots of sailors, lots of soldiers. Mithras, much like Abersox, also there's a lot of stuff about the 7 planets. There were 7 stations in the Mithraic mystery, 7 offices, which had initiatory correlations that you would go through for each of the 7 planets. So we don't have a lot of written material about the Mithraic mysteries, but what we do have is archaeological evidence from these little Mithraians, these little chambers where they did the initiations. And we know from the artwork, like from the engravings and the sculptures and stuff, we can kind of put together some pieces about what was going on with the story of the god Mithras. So one of the things that's with the solar symbolism that's interesting, Mithras is frequently depicted as slaying the bull. So he looks just kind of like a normal young man. He's wearing what they call a little Phrygian cap. He has a cape, and you'll usually see him sort of kneeling over a bowl. He's like holding a bowl, and he has a knife or a dagger in one hand, and he's sacrificing the bull. But in many of the imagery, we also see the sun god Helios. We see him driving his solar chariot across the sky in many of these depictions with Mithras in it. So you have Mithras down at the bottom slaying the bull, and you'll see like Helios up above, riding the solar chariot across the sky. And then there are other images where it's like Mithras and Helios are like, it looks like they're doing some sort of like handshake. Maybe it's supposed to be like a secret initiatory handshake, but clearly Helios, the sun god, is not the same as Mithras, but they work very closely together. That's like, we clearly know from the artwork, even though we don't have the written text of what's going on, but we know that Mithras and Helios are working closely together. Maybe they were perceived as brothers or something, or just sort of like partners in this magical solar work that they were doing. But something that has been pointed out, and this is post-Crowley academic research, that Crowley probably did not have access to this. So Mithras was not himself the sun god, but it's believed the significance of him slaying the bull has to do with the precession of the equinoxes. And it has to do with how, when the sun enters spring, over the course of time, it shifts through different signs of the zodiac. So the bull, of course, would be Taurus. So this is perhaps signifying a shift from Taurus to Aries in the precession of the equinoxes. And that would be why he's slaying the bull. It's like the power of the bull. I mean, this is partially my interpretation of the symbolism, but the power of the bull is no longer dominant, perhaps. In which case, does Mithras represent the power of Aries? I don't know. But a lot of academics do think that there is this sort of zodiacal symbolism going on. Furthermore, what I think is even more interesting in the context of the Gnostic Mass is that Mithras, while he is not the sun god himself, many academics have come to believe that he is associated with the pole star, right? The North Star, which from the perspective of us people on Earth, the other stars look like they are rotating around the pole star, right? And the ancients certainly would have, they didn't have knowledge of astrophysics. To them, the pole star was this cosmic center that the other stars were rotating around. So in this sense, Mithras is actually this cosmic power that is like the sun, and that all these other forces revolve around it, but is beyond the sun. It's almost like a super solar symbol, like this super cosmic sort of solar thing. I think it's really interesting if you think about the symbolism of that. We don't know exactly how the Mithraic initiates interpreted it, though. A lot of this is very speculative. So I just want to put that out there. It's not like firmly understood historically, but definitely there's some interesting symbolism going on there. So it's almost 5:30. I think that that's a good place to stop. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts on that?
The Gnostic Mass is a juggernaut of a magical ritual.
Yeah, it is.
Every single
It
time I put
definitely
it,
is.
every single time I put it up to the light and try to look at it from, or get somebody else's perspective. Thank you. It's just like that 3D compodium in the Jodie Foster movie, which was it, that they stole off the listers. Anyway, the alien set a compodium with
Contact,
everything. Yeah. So I'm just amazed at how much is in that ritual and how powerful it is, and how every single permutation of it drops new stuff out. So thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really is. I think it's particularly interesting that a lot of this stuff on Gnosticism, the information wasn't available in Crowley's time. So Crowley couldn't have even understood the full implications of all this stuff. To me, that makes the ritual more powerful. It really kind of, it makes it appear to me like there was, something greater, beyond Crowley that was being communicated through him.
Well, I think he did understand, not Gnosticism, but I think that idea has come up in some of the saints that he listed understood that. And they understood, like, taking a Shakespearean play and going over and over and over and over again, and how several different people could do it with the same play and come up with a central piece of knowledge. So I think he understood that. I think he understood truth within permutation. But I don't know. Like you said,
Yeah.
that's my interpretation of it. So.
And I just wanted to ask, when looking at the Gnostic Mass and Liber XV, you're talking about the Gnostic Mass where, everyone participating in the Mass, is part of the one body. But then when you do Liber XV, if you're doing like the same kind of magical formula and magical process, how do you equate all those different parts within the one being performing the ritual? Are you talking about like personalities? Are you talking about just like energetic things within ourselves that we're bringing in together to harness and focus to connect to that HGA conversation aspect that you can get from the Mass or from Liber XV, except one's group and one is like singular? Am I making sense? I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And I mean, I don't have the answer in terms of Liber XV because I don't feel like I understand the mysteries of the, the Holy Guardian Angel well enough. I don't understand, the mysteries of attaining knowledge and conversation well enough. But I do, I mean, I would just say, like, my opinion from doing, experimenting with the ritual, my understanding of it is, I do think that when you're going through the elements, right, the 5 elements, you're invoking all these different God names in the different quarters. I do think that what's happening is this sort of hermetic as above, so below thing, where you're calling on these powers that exist in the cosmos, but they also exist within your microcosm, right, within your soul. So like we were talking about, how EIO, as Crowley utilizes it in Liber XV, he sees it as this formula of the beast, and he very much identifies it with that. But you're also calling on Babylon. I think Babylon and the beast exist as forces in the cosmos, but they also exist in each of us, right? So you're sort of calling them forth and harmonizing them within your own being. And my understanding, and I could be way off here, my understanding though is once you have equilibrated the elements within your own being, and there's a sort of harmony between the macrocosm and the microcosm, that allows the angel to then indwell, right? The angel can then sort of enter into your temple, so to speak, because you have equilibrated all these elemental forces. That's my understanding of it. So yeah, but I mean, I think that practice, rather than, reading books and stuff is great, but I think that practice is probably going to answer that question for most of us, and it's probably going to be a little different for all of us.
Yeah, Dave, I was just going to say, Vanessa, every single one of those questions are perfect. And at some point you get to like, wow, when I start asking these questions, that's just my roadmap for my next ritual exploratory session. Basically just like the answer is, yeah, go check out all of those, because there might be answers underneath every single one of those perspectives or methodologies.
Definitely. Thank you. Invoke often, Dan says.
Absolutely. That's what Crowley says at the end of Liber XV. And that's what he says was his secret to success, was invoke often. All right. Do you guys have anything else?
I will stop recording and then however we want to do.
All right. Awesome.